Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm going to be swatching every single jelly polish from Cirque colors. So in case you don't know, a jelly polish is a super translucent, very squishy type of finish. So it's intentionally sheer so that way you can see through it and the color builds up to give it a really juicy, almost candy-like effect. Cirque does have a lot of like sheer polishes and neutrals that are mainly used for like negative space nail art or a your nails but better or cleaner kind of look, which I will be sharing in this video too, but I also wanted to share all of the jelly polishes that they have because they have given us like over 40 over the years, and there's definitely a lot of similarity between some of the colors, so I figured it might be helpful to see them all together. This video is already super long as you can tell, so I will save more of my thoughts at the end after some collages so you can see comparisons, but for now let's just get into the swatches. So the first polish we have is XOXO Jelly, and this one came out in the Glazed 2022 collection a couple of years ago, and it is just a hot pink jelly polish. This one is easily one of my favorites because if you don't know me, I love pink nails, and I especially love a jelly hot pink for the summer months. I think it's just so juicy and squishy. This one has a sheer but still easy to work with formula, but because this is one of the older jellies, it has the skinny brushes, which I think makes it a little bit streaky or uneven on the first coat. Even though I did have to dip back into the bottle to get polish on the other half of my nail, it still evens out really nicely. It's a very self-leveling formula, so I think the coverage is even enough that it's passable on 2 coats if you really wanted to, but personally I do like building up some jellies in 3 coats just to give it a super juicy, plump, squishy effect. I especially love this one in the summer. Next we have Poppy Jelly, and this is one of the newest ones that came out in the Glazed 2024 collection. This one is described as a bright, warm red. As you can see, this one has the new paddle brushes, and it just makes such a world of difference when it comes to getting more even application. Though I will say it wasn't perfectly even on the first coat, but again, for this kind of color, I think it looks best built up in at least 2 or 3 coats. 2 coats definitely does make it look really nice and even, but I just prefer doing a 3rd coat to intensify the color and just make it look so rich. And speaking of the color, I actually really ended up liking this one a lot. When I first saw the lineup, I thought it was going to be my least favorite because I usually don't go for these orange leaning reds, but I actually ended up really liking it. So I'm also looking forward to wearing this one in the summer. Next we have Lucky Jelly, which released for Lunar New Year 2023, and this one is described as a medium true red jelly. I definitely think that's a pretty accurate description. I would pretty much call this a true red jelly polish, where it isn't too orange leaning like Poppy or too blue leaning. This one's definitely really bright, but still not a neon or anything. And as you can see, because of the skinny brush, I did end up having similar application to XOXO Jelly, where it just wasn't the most even coverage on the first coat, but it does build up really nicely on 2 coats as seen here. I personally think that this one looks really great on 2 coats where the color is super vibrant. I still did do a 3rd coat just for the swatch video just so you can see how that looks, but I don't think it's totally necessary. Maybe it does cover up a little bit more of the nail line, but it's still gonna be pretty obvious. So yeah, this is another beautiful one. I'm normally not a fan of just red nails, but I really love the squishy look of this one. Next we have Rust Jelly, which came out in the Tortoise set from fall 2023. This one is described as a reddish brick brown jelly. So I personally don't think I would call this a brick brown kind of shade. It doesn't really seem dark enough or brown enough. I feel like this one leans a little bit more in that burnt orange kind of category, but it still is definitely very red leaning. Even though this one does have the wide brush, I'm not a super big fan of how it looks in just 1 coat. I just prefer how the color builds up more in 2 or 3 coats. If anything, I guess it is looking a little bit more orangey here on camera, but it's still beautiful either way. I feel like this isn't normally a color I would go for, but it really is so flattering, especially for the fall season. Next, we have Hearth Jelly from the Good Vibrations collection, and this one is described as a muted coral jelly. I can definitely see this being called a muted coral, but the first color that comes to my mind when looking at the shade is a terracotta, and I absolutely love that. It might not look super impressive or flattering on the first coat, especially because my nails are stained, so some of that yellow is kind of coming through. But once you add another coat, you really start to see more of that coral color building up, and it is just so pretty. Even though I normally would consider terracotta a very fall color or like late summer, I still think this is a really flattering color that can work in any season. And I know that you can wear whatever color you want, whenever you want, but I'm just saying that as a seasonal wearer. So I personally think this one has a little bit of like milkiness maybe to it, because I think on 3 coats it covers up the nail line a little bit more. So even though this one was discontinued, I still wanted to show it because it's just one of my favorite Cirque jellies that has come out. This is Fuyū Jelly from the MXM Tune collection, and it's described as a marmalade orange jelly. I kind of always call this one like a muted or dusty peachy color. In a way, it's similar to Hearth in that sense, where it's like a muted coral, but Fuyū is a lot more on the orange side and a little bit lighter, but not anywhere near like a pastel. This one has another amazing formula that builds up really nicely and evenly. I think it looks really nice on 2 coats, but my preference is on 3 coats just because it adds a little bit more opacity, but still maintains that squishy quality. And I feel like this is another one that does lean a little bit more on the milky side. It's such a shame that this one isn't around anymore because I think it is just so flattering and so pretty for summer. Next we have Saffron Jelly, and this is from the Gourmand collection. This one is described as an amber orange jelly. I definitely think that's a really great description for this shade because even though this is a true orange polish, it definitely does have a bright kind of yellow leaning tone to it. And even though this one does have the skinny brush, it was surprisingly even coverage on the first coat. Not that I would wear it this way just because I personally don't think it's really flattering, but this one does build up really nicely in 2 and 3 coats. Obviously, the more coats that you do, the more brighter and juicy orange color you're gonna get. I feel like it almost has this like tangerine kind of quality to it, and I am just so obsessed with this one. I feel like this really does have one of the best candy-like jelly finishes. It's just so plump and juicy. It is super high gloss. It even almost has like a syrupy quality to it. It is just so freaking good. If you love oranges, you need this one. Next we have Mustard Jelly, and this is also from the Tortoise set. This one is described as a muted yellow-orange jelly. I personally would call this more of like a cross between a honey and an amber kind of color. I think it's a super beautiful color in concept, but I just don't love this one on me. Obviously, I don't think it's really flattering on the first coat because it just looks like badly stained nails, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like I already mentioned, my nails are also stained, but I'm just not a fan of how it looks. So I think I personally would try this one with a blurring base coat underneath just to kind of cover up some of the nail line but still get that really beautiful rich amber kind of color, because again, I think the color is super gorgeous, especially for fall. I feel like sometimes this kind of color can be considered one of those ugly pretty colors, so you'll have to let me know if you like this one. Next we have Mango Jelly from the Glazed 2024 collection. This one is described as a yellow-orange instead of an orange-yellow, but obviously by the name, this one can also be described as a mango-colored polish. I absolutely love this one, even though again, I wouldn't wear this in 1 coat just because it has that really stained nail kind of look. It is really even coverage though, kind of similar to Saffron Jelly, and I found that this one was pretty pigmented too. Usually yellows are notoriously bad with their formulas. They're either sheer or streaky, and especially when it's a jelly polish, I figured it was going to be super sheer, but it builds up so beautifully. You get a beautiful juicy color on 2 and especially 3 coats. I do want to mention though, I normally am a little bit heavy-handed, so if you do prefer doing thinner coats, this one might look a little more sheer. Next, we have Citron Jelly from the Glaze 2022 collection, and this one is described as a lemon yellow. I absolutely love this one. Even though you're going to see me kind of struggle with the formula, or specifically the skinny brush, the color is just so cute. Normally, when brands release jellies, and especially yellow jellies, they usually are kind of in that like mustard color, and so I was just so excited to see this bright, white-based, almost primary yellow as a jelly. I feel like I just had never seen it before, and it just was so pretty. Hopefully I'm doing it justice because I know I'm like really struggling with the skinny brush. I admittedly am not the best at painting my nails. Like, I don't always have very clean swatches, so apologies if that bothers you, but yeah, I'm pretty sure if this one had a wide paddle brush, the application would be so much better, so much smoother, and more even. This next shade is also from the MXM Tune collection, so it's sadly not around anymore, but I still had to share it because it's one of my favorites. It's called Gogh Away, and it's described as a pale yellow jelly. This was just another immediate favorite because I just love the more pastel lemon kind of color. This one also has a little bit more of a milky sort of quality, so it provides a bit more coverage than some of the other jellies that are just a lot more see-through and translucent. And as you can see, even though this one does have the wide paddle brush, I still kind of struggled with getting this totally even. So I found that I did need a third coat just to even everything out, but I still didn't mind just because I love how it builds up the color even more, so it's like that brighter pastel kind of yellow. I think it is just so cute. So even though this one isn't around, this one is pretty dupeable by layering linen over Citron Jelly. Next, we have Starfruit Jelly from the Glaze 2024 collection, and this one is described as a chartreuse jelly. So like I said in my initial review video, I was pretty surprised at how much I loved this one because I normally do not love chartreuse colors. I just don't find them to be especially flattering, so any kind of like yellow-green I'm just really picky with, but I feel like this one has just a small hint of yellow, but it leans very much more on the green side of chartreuse, so I really love it. I honestly feel like I could even call this a lime green or kind of like one of those neon tennis ball shades. It's definitely super bright but not neon, and as you saw from the formula, this one is also pretty sheer and very translucent. Next, we have Lime Jelly from the Sea Glass collection, and this is a bright lime green polish. This is a beautiful shade of green. I feel like there's not even a hint of yellow, maybe a little bit because it's lime, but I just find it so flattering. So despite me kind of struggling with the formula or application because of the skinny brush, the formula itself was very easy to work with. It self-levels really nicely, and I don't know if you can tell, but this one is a little bit more on the milky side too, so on 2 coats it does provide a decent amount of coverage. You do still see some nail line, but I feel like this one on 2 coats looks like how some of the other jellies look on 3, if that makes sense. But for the sake of consistency, I'm still going to be doing a 3rd coat for this swatch, and again, even though there is still a hint of nail line there, it's still pretty obscured compared to just some of the other jellies. Up next, we have Olive Jelly, and this was from the very first Glaze collection from 2021. This one, no surprise, is an olive-colored jelly, and something that I noticed with doing these swatches, I think the very first Glaze collection, which again I will be mentioning as we get to the other shades, just featured some thinner formulas where they were maybe a little bit more on the watery side. You can probably tell just by how sheer this one builds up on 2 coats, where there is a wash of color, but it's just not as opaque as some of the other polishes so far, despite this one being on the slightly darker, more muted side. But even still, this one did have a very nice formula where it was still very self-leveling. It was just a little bit more sheer than the others. So personally, I think this one is going to look the best in 3 coats where the color is just built up more, but even still, I'm just not really a fan of this color. But if you are a fan of the swampy chic, ugly, pretty colors, this one is definitely for you. Next we have Kelly Jelly from the Glaze 2022 collection, and this one is described as a grass green jelly polish. This is definitely the shade of green that I think of when I think of like a true green, but I still can't say it's one of my favorite shades of green. I just don't really love these kind of Kelly greens where they're like very grassy, but personal preference aside, this one again had a great formula that was very self-leveling, super easy to work with. Even though it was sheer on the first coat, I found that it was really even coverage. So this is one of those shades that could look really good on 1, 2, or 3 coats depending on your preference. This also is definitely one of the super true jelly shades where it's very translucent. On 3 coats you are going to get more of that color buildup but still see straight through to your nail line. So technically the last green is Jade Jelly, which is described as a sheer seafoam green. And my bottle has the black cap because I used one of the KB Shimmer replacement brushes because my original brush for this polish was super wonky, even though it was one of the skinny brushes. This one has such a flawless formula though, and it's definitely one of my favorite jellies from Cirque too. I just absolutely love how soothing this color is. It really does toe the line between being like a blue and green, but I would say it really is like a very true jade where it's just more on the green side. And this one also does have a little bit more of a milky kind of quality to it, so you can see a bit more coverage build up the more coats that you do. I think this one is just so stunning and so flattering, so I can't recommend this one enough. Next we have Verdigris Jelly, and this is from the Holiday 2022 collection. This one is described as a dusty teal green jelly. I absolutely love this one. I feel like it's one of the more unique jelly polishes. You just normally don't see teal jellies like this one, and this one was just so beautiful. I loved it as part of that winter collection just because it wasn't the traditional or expected pine green. The teal definitely makes it so much prettier in my opinion, but I also wouldn't be mad at Cirque giving us a pine green jelly because we don't have that. In terms of formula, this one performed very well, similar to a lot of the other jellies we've seen so far, where it was pretty easy to work with, relatively even coverage depending on your application and how careful you are, especially if you have the skinny brush, but if you have a wide brush, it probably will be a lot easier and more even coverage. Personally, I love how this looks more on 3 coats just because it intensifies that rich teal color. So finally moving on to the blues, the first one we have is Lagoon Jelly from the Glazed 2024 collection. This one is described as a robin egg blue, but personally I think it's a little too light maybe to be considered a robin's egg kind of color. When I first saw the shade, I just immediately thought of like aqua waters, so I can see how that would be confusing to describe this as aqua. Either way, it's an absolutely beautiful color. I think it just pops so much, especially once it's built up in 3 coats. I think it does look nice on 2 coats here. It just has like that really nice wash of color, but 3 coats is where it really pops and looks so bright. I'm not sure if you noticed either, but I would say that this one has a little bit of that milky kind of formula too. It doesn't really cover up the nail line that much, but it's just not as translucent and glassy as some other colors. So next we have Aqua Jelly from the Sea Glass collection, and this one is described as a cyan blue polish. Except I personally don't think I would call it a cyan. I feel like it's a pretty true sky blue kind of shade, but either way, however you want to describe it, it's still a really pretty shade of blue. This one had another nice formula that was relatively easy to work with and self-level. It had a pretty decent amount of pigmentation on the first coat as well, so I feel like this is pretty similar to maybe Lime Jelly, for example, in terms of coverage, where you do still see some nail line, but it still looks like how other jellies look on 3 coats. So I think this one is pretty passable on just 2, but doing a 3rd definitely obscures your nail line even more. It's not 100% opaque and still maintains that really squishy jelly feel. So again, I might be struggling with the skinny brush, but as you can see, it self-levels really beautifully. Up next we have Morning Tide, and this one came out in the Daylight collection a couple of years ago. This one is described as a sheer French blue. I would say that this one has a bit of a dustiness and maybe almost periwinkle leaning color to it, or maybe more like a cornflower, something along those lines, and it is easily one of my favorite Cirque jellies. As you saw, it has a really great formula that self-levels so beautifully, so it's really even coverage even on one coat alone. But like the other jellies, I just prefer this built up in at least 2 but usually 3 coats where the color is just a little bit more intensified. And this one also has that slight milky sort of formula too, so I definitely get a bit more coverage on the 3rd coat as well. But yeah, just look at this color. It is so beautiful. Definitely one of my favorite shades, especially for the springtime. I think it is just so elegant and so flattering. Next we have Navy Jelly, and this was from the first Glazed collection from 2021. This one is described as a deep blue nail polish. So this was from the same collection as Olive Jelly, and if you remember, I had mentioned something about the formula just being a little bit on the thinner side, and I feel like that was definitely true for this shade as well. As you saw, I kind of immediately flooded my cuticle area, even though that does tend to happen with some other polishes because the brushes might be a little wonky, or I'm just, again, not the best at painting my nails. I did notice a notable difference in the actual consistency of the formula, so you just have to be a little bit careful with your application. You don't want to grab too much polish with this specific shade, but it still is really easy to work with and apply. It self-levels beautifully, and while this one is sheer too, it does build up really nicely to this beautiful dusty denim kind of color. I feel like this one looks a little bit milky, especially once it's built up in 3 coats, but either way, it's such a beautiful blue, especially for the fall. I love how muted it is. Next we have Cobalt Jelly, and this is a true cobalt or an Yves Klein blue. So this one looks super bright and almost neon in the bottle. It definitely can build up that way, especially in 3 coats, but this one is definitely a very sheer and true translucent jelly shade. As you can see here on the 1st coat, it was just really sheer, not the most even coverage. In a way, it was a little bit on the thinner side as well. It probably would be better if you did have a wider brush, but even still, you are just not really gonna get any coverage in terms of opacity. As you can see here on the 2nd coat, the color is already starting to deepen up and intensify, but you can still see straight through to my nail line. So this is definitely on the more glassy, translucent side of all the jellies, where literally no matter how many coats you do, it is not going to cover up your nail line. It'll just get a little bit darker each time. I do think it is really cool though, because I feel like it just reminds me so much of stained glass. But even if you decide to use a blurring base coat, I feel like the color is just so striking. And going even darker, we have Indigo Jelly, which was one of the returning jellies from the Shibori set a couple of years ago. This one is described as a dark, inky indigo polish, and it is absolutely another favorite of mine. I really do love like the inky description of this. I feel like it's just so accurate. Here on the 1st coat, you can see that it is pretty pigmented, but not super even coverage, and it's definitely still really sheer, so it's not giving you that super rich color that you see in the bottle. It does start to build up nicely on 2 coats though, where I do think it is passable if you want to wear it in a little bit of a lighter shade, but I just love how it looks when it's built up in 3. The blue is so bold and beautiful, but it's still really glassy and translucent, so I feel like this one is very similar to Cobalt Jelly in that way, where it almost gives like a stained glass effect. So what better way to transition from the blues into the purples than with Blurple Jelly? This one came out in the Glazed 2024 collection and is a blue-purple polish. This one might not look super flattering on the 1st coat alone, but it does have really nice even coverage, especially with that wide paddle brush. So it definitely does build up really nicely on 2 coats. It still is a bit more on the sheer side though, where it certainly is passable because of how even coverage is, but I definitely like this one more on 3 coats just because it brightens up the color so much. It is just so fun and punchy, and even though it is described as a blurple, I feel like this one does lean a little bit more on the purple side. Getting into the true purples though, the first one we have is Ube Jelly from the Gourmand collection, and this one is described as a mid-toned purple polish. So even though this is a true purple and not a blurple, I would say that this one still is on the cooler side where it has more of a blue undertone instead of being a red leaning purple. It almost has this like wisteria kind of color to it, and I think it's really pretty. On the first coat, it gives a slight wash of color. It's not really a shade of purple that I would say is suitable enough to wear on one coat. Like there are sheer purples that are really good at canceling out staining on your nails, but I personally don't think this is one of them. To me, this is definitely one of those shades that just looks best built up in 2 or 3 coats where you see more of that true purple color. It definitely looks nice and passable in 2 coats, but I prefer it in 3 where it's just brighter and a bit more juicy. Despite it looking super sheer on the first coat, I actually feel like this one is a little bit more on the milky side where your nail line is a little bit more obscured on 3 coats. Next up we have Haze Jelly, which is described as a sheer lavender gray, and this one came out in the Glazed 2022 collection, which was the same collection as XOXO and Citron. So it was definitely interesting to see this shade just because of how muted it is. It really is one of those hazy, purpley gray sort of shades. So I feel like it just wasn't as bright as some of the other colors in that collection, but it still is a really pretty shade on its own. As you saw on the first coat, it was definitely super sheer where it just barely gives a wash of color. So I think if you do a thin enough first coat, this polish could lend itself well to being one of those purples that cancels out any yellow staining. But I still don't love this shade for that specific reason, just because of how grayed out it is. It just might be a little too muted, but that could also just be personal preference. So like some of the other jellies, I definitely think this one builds up beautifully in 2 coats and is certainly passable that way, but I think this one is a little bit on the milky side, so you get more coverage on 3 coats. Next up we have another one of my favorites. This one is Lavender Sky from the Daylight collection. This is a sheer pastel lilac purple, and it is just so beautiful. I think the color is just so flattering, and this is one of those shades that I personally think looks really great if you do 1, 2, or 3 coats, depending on the coverage that you want. I personally think that the tone of purple that this is perfect for it, canceling out any yellow and brightening up your nails. But I personally still don't really wear this one super often in 1 coat. I just love the color so much, so I just prefer building it up in 2 or especially 3 coats where the color is just a lot brighter, and I feel like this one formula wise is a little bit on the milkier side, so it does provide a little bit more coverage than some of the other jellies, which I am just a big fan of. I think this one is so pretty, especially for spring. If you wanted a darker purple though, you might like Eros Jelly. This one came out in the Falling in Lust collection, and it's described as a violet jelly color. This one has more of that same translucent stained glass kind of look that Cobalt or Indigo have, but in a rich, deep purple color. And kind of like those other shades, I was struggling a bit with my application on the first coat, so it's looking a little splotchy, not super flattering because of how uneven it is. And as you probably saw, I just grabbed a little too much polish on the second coat, so it still wasn't super even coverage because these jellies have like a little bit of a looser kind of formula. If you have too much polish, it's gonna tend to pool, so you'll want to be careful with your application and maybe stick to doing thinner coats. Even if you have to dip back into the bottle like I've done with other jellies, they do end up self-leveling, so it's just easier to work with that way. But either way, this color is so gorgeous. Next we have Bitten Jelly from the same Falling in Lust collection, and this one is described as a deep magenta red jelly. So this one definitely looks super dark and vampy in the bottle, so when I first applied it, I wasn't exactly impressed. I just kind of was a little let down because of how much lighter the color is, but it's still a really beautiful shade of magenta, and it does deepen up in color the more coats that you do. And I did end up switching to one of the wide paddle brushes for this shade, so you you saw, I had really great even coverage on the first coat. I accidentally didn't record the application for the second coat, but it pretty much just deepened the color. And the same thing goes for the third coat as seen here. It just makes it ever so slightly darker, but definitely not dark enough to match what's in the bottle. Either way though, still a super gorgeous shade that is so glassy. Next we have Marsala Jelly from the 2021 Glazed collection. This one is described as a warm, earthy hibiscus. This one I feel like is a fan favorite. It just is such a beautiful and flattering color. Like, you probably have a cream in this color more or less, but having it in a squishy jelly formula just makes it so much more flattering for some reason. So like I mentioned with other shades like Olive and Navy Jelly, this one had a little bit of a thinner formula, but it's still self-leveled really beautifully on one coat where it was very even. But like all the other jellies, I pretty much prefer this built up in 2 or even 3 coats just to deepen the color. This actually had really great pigmentation on the second coat, where I feel like if you have shorter nails, this would look really nice on just 2 coats alone. So doing a third isn't necessary unless you have longer nails, but it does kind of obscure the nail line a little bit more. But I think inherently the formula isn't as milky as some other shades like Lavender Sky, for example. Either way, this one is a gorgeous color and I can totally understand why it's always recommended. Next we have Berry Jelly, and this was from the Glazed 2022 collection. This one is a magenta purple polish. So it's basically like a warm red or pink leaning kind of purple, and it is super, super pretty. I think this one had a great formula too, where it was really even coverage on the first coat alone, even with the skinny brush, and it starts to build up nicely in 2 coats. You still see straight through to your nail line though, so it is a little bit more on like the glassy, translucent side, but it still has a good amount of color, so I think this is one of those perfect shades to use for glitter or jelly sandwiches. But of course, I'm still going to show you how this looks in 3 coats where it's built up a bit more in color, but not really in opacity. So I think this is another super versatile shade if you wanted to wear it a little darker on 3 coats or a little bit more of a pastel take on 2 coats. Up next we have Pink Lady Jelly, and this was from the Glazed 2024 collection, and it's described as a cool-toned medium pink. I definitely think that's a pretty fitting description for this shade. It's not quite a bubblegum kind of pink. I feel like it's a little too dark and maybe more purple leaning. Like, to me, the first shade that I thought of was kind of one of those orchid pink colors. And personally, I find that there's a little bit too much pigmentation on this color in 1 coat, so I wouldn't wear it for like negative space nail art or anything, but it does look nice if you want just a subtle wash of pink color. And like a lot of the other jellies, it starts to build up more in 2 or 3 coats, where you definitely still see a lot of nail line, but it's a bit more obscured on 3. But I think the color payoff is so worth it. At first, I was a little nervous because I normally don't love these kind of orchid pinks, but I do think this one is pretty. Next we have Rosewater Jelly from the Gourmand collection, and this one is also described as a cool-toned pink, but it's a little bit lighter and more on the muted side as well. I feel like this almost has a mauve-y kind of quality to it, and formula-wise, this one is definitely on the more sheer side, where as you can see on the first coat, it just provides the slightest wash of color. It's one of those barely there kind of nail polishes that really brightens up your nails and just looks so flattering in my opinion, regardless of how many coats you do. I especially love how it looks built up in 2 coats as seen here, because it just gives a little wash of that color. So it does look like you are wearing something on your nails, but it's just so flattering in my opinion. And doing a 3rd coat adds a little bit more color to your mani, but again, it does not cover any nail line, so this also has that super glassy kind of finish. It definitely might not look like much, but I do really love this one. Then we have Peach Jelly from the Glazed 2022 collection. This one is described as a light coral pink jelly. I think this is such a cute peach color, especially having it in a jelly finish. The formula was really nice too, where it was very even coverage. I know it doesn't really look like much on my nails. It just adds like a little bit of warmth, which to be honest, I don't completely love because again, my nails are stained and I think the yellow just kind of is accentuated by the slight orangey color. But it does start to build up really nicely in 2 coats where the color is more built up and just looks more intentional. And no surprise, my favorite for this shade is wearing it on 3 coats just because it obscures the nail line a tiny bit, but I don't think I would call this one of the milkier shades. It's kind of hard to tell because I feel like it does sort of look like Jade or Morning Tide, but if you happen to do thinner coats, then you obviously are going to see more nail line. Either way, it's a super pretty color that adds a little bit of warmth to a neutral shade. Next we have Rose Jelly from the Rose Quartz set, and this one is a sheer rose pink polish. So it's pretty similar to the last shade, just not as warm or peachy. It really is one of those soft blush, almost mauve-y kind of shades. So I personally think it looks really nice and flattering on just one coat where you get that subtle wash of color. It sort of freshens up your nails and it doesn't look too bad even if your nails are stained like mine, I think. You start to get more of that color buildup on the second coat, so I think this is definitely another one of those shades that looks super flattering whether you wear it in 1, 2, or 3 coats. And even though you do still see a decent amount of nail line, I do think that this one is a little bit more on the milky side because I feel like it just builds up so much more on 2 coats and obscures the nail line, and the same can obviously be said when you do a 3rd coat. So this one is kind of familiar to Jade Jelly or Morning Tide or Lavender Sky in my opinion. I think the shade is so beautiful and so flattering. It really has this romantic and elegant feel to the color. I love this one so much. So getting into the sheers, which are basically jelly adjacent, but I feel like these colors lend themselves to be really perfect for negative space nail art, the base for French tips, like that kind of shade range where it's a your nails but better kind of color. So the first shade that we have is Georgette, and this one is described as a sheer mauve pink. It's a little bit on the muted or medium side, and I actually really love how this looks on one coat alone. I'm not sure if it's my ideal sheer shade because I'm not really great at undertones and all of that stuff, but I still think it was really pretty, and it does start to build up beautifully in 2 coats. I think it has a bit more of a milky kind of finish too, where maybe the majority of Cirque's sheers are on like the milky side. So ideally they look great in 1 coat where it just freshens up your nails, but you can just build them up for a little bit more coverage in 2 or 3 coats. As you can see here on 3 coats, my nail line is pretty obscured, but just as a reminder, I am a little bit heavy-handed, so if you do tend to do thinner coats, you might have a bit more. Next we have Chiffon, and I feel like this is one of the very first sheers that Cirque put out. It was a trio, but this one is described as a sheer warm-toned pale pink. So this is basically Cirque's version of a sheer milky pink that's your classic go-to kind of staple or essential. It certainly is for me at least because this is like my 4th or 5th bottle. I absolutely love this color. I think it's just so perfect on the first coat alone where it's just my go-to whenever I do any kind of French tip or negative space nail art. It covers up my staining and just brightens up my nails and looks so nice. I have also worn this on 2 coats before and I do like it sometimes. It's just not my favorite because as you can see it's definitely a very like white based kind of pink, and for some reason they just kind of irk me sometimes. I can't explain it, but sometimes on 2 coats I just do not like how this looks on me. Maybe it has something to do with the staining coming through, but either way this one is a classic for a reason and definitely a must-have if you don't already have a sheer pink. Next we have Organza, and this is from the same very first sheers trio as Chiffon, and this one is described as a sheer pale peach. So I personally don't agree with the peachy description of this shade. I feel like this one just leans a bit more on the yellow side, which unfortunately doesn't make me love this shade because like I've mentioned before, my nails are usually stained a little bit yellow, so this color just doesn't really do anything to hide that for me. If anything, it just kind of makes it worse because it accentuates that yellow color. So I definitely wouldn't be calling this my ideal sheer shade by any means, but I do think the color still can work. Last fall, Cirque created these nail art sets and they included this shade as part of the Blonde Tortoise set, and I really think this shade is the perfect base color for a blonde tortoise look where it's kind of that yellowy beigey sort of shade, so I do really like it for that specific reason. Either way, it still had a great formula, very similar to Chiffon. And the last shade from the initial Sheers trio was Linen, and this one is just a sheer white polish. So I know not a lot of people are fans of milky white shades, but if you happen to be one of them, this shade is so pretty. Granted, my bottle is a little bit older, so I feel like it could use some thinner just to loosen up the formula a little bit and make it self-level even better, because I feel like it just was not the most even coverage on the first coat or maybe even the second, but it generally is the same kind of formula as chiffon and organza, where they're just sheer, milky, but still buildable shades. I personally love a good milky white like this one, just because I find them to be so refreshing and flattering. I love white nails in the summer, and having a squishy look just, I don't know, I think it looks more flattering than a stark, opaque white where it just kind of reminds me of whiteout, which there's a time and place for that, but I feel like this one is just so much more elevated. Next, we have one of the newest sheers. This one is Odette from the Encore collection, and this one is also described as a cool-toned pale pink sheer. So I think that makes the third or possibly the fourth one, but this one is definitely the most wearable, I think, in one coat, or rather, it's definitely my favorite to wear in one coat. I feel like the pink is just so pale. It definitely flirts with being a white too. It is a super milky shade, but it has such a fantastic self-leveling formula, so it looks really great in 1, 2, or 3 coats depending on the coverage that you want or even just the amount of color that you want. I normally am a fan of colorful nails, but I just love a good shade like this that is just such a perfect palette cleanser. It just looks so clean and so fresh. So while this one builds up perfectly in 3 coats, I personally prefer this one in just 1 or 2. Next, we have Kismet from the Good Vibrations collection, and this one is a pale lilac gray. So if you watched my initial review video with this polish, you know that I absolutely love this, which I know it might sound kind of silly because here on the first coat, it barely looks like I applied anything. It is a really subtle color, but I feel like on one coat alone, it just brightens up my nails so much. And because it has that slight purple leaning color to it, I feel like it perfectly counteracts any staining that I have, so it just became an immediate favorite for me. I also really love how this looks in 2 coats because this one is a lot more sheer. I find that this one is the least milky of the sheers so far, but it still does build up beautifully, where on the 3rd coat you do start to see that hint of that lavender kind of grayed out purple color. I know it doesn't look like much and the shade is definitely not going to be for everybody, but I love it. So finally getting into some of the neutral kind of colors, the first one we have is Dove Jelly, which came out in the Glazed 2021 collection, and this one is a gray sheer polish. I personally feel like this is one of the most underrated jellies that they have. I know it's just so unassuming because it's a light gray jelly, and you would think it's not super flattering, or I don't know, maybe that's just me because I normally don't go for gray polishes, but this one is so beautiful. I think it actually looks really nice on the first coat alone. It's very even coverage, so you definitely can wear it in 1 coat, and the color is soft enough but still somehow bright enough where it doesn't give you dead hands, or at least it didn't for me, so I really liked it. It does start to build up nicely as well on 2 and 3 coats, and I think I would say that this one is also a little bit on the milkier side, where despite how sheer it initially seems, it does kind of obscure the nail line a decent amount on 3 coats. So like I mentioned, I don't have a lot of grays in my collection, but I really love this one. Next, we have Cocoa Jelly from the same Glazed 2021 collection, and this one is described as a warm brown jelly. So as you can see here on the first coat, it's not super impressive. It is definitely incredibly sheer, similar to some of the other shades from that same collection, like olive and navy. So I personally wouldn't wear this in just 1 coat, but thankfully it does start to build up even more on the 2nd coat. And again, as you can see, I kind of grabbed a little too much polish on the brush, so So this particular formula was just a little bit on the runny side, and I ended up kind of flaying my cuticle. So you definitely want to be careful with your application. I'm assuming with the wider brush you wouldn't really have this issue, but yeah, for whatever reason I just didn't find that this one self-leveled the best or as nicely as some of the other jellies. So even on 3 coats it looked a little bit uneven with some light spots, but regardless I do think the color is really nice and it's just so cozy, especially with the name. Next we have Mahogany Jelly, and this is from the Tortoise set. This one is also described as being a warm toned brown, but I don't think I would agree with that. I definitely think that Cocoa Jelly is warmer than this shade. This one to me has a little bit more of like a yellow or just possibly neutral kind of undertone. I feel like the swatch photos of this one definitely lean a lot more red than it actually is. Unfortunately, that's just a problem that Cirque has with over editing their photos. Either way though, I still think this is a really nice shade of brown. It looked pretty even coverage on the first coat alone, but I feel like on the second coat it wasn't as even as I was hoping it would be. It might not be super noticeable on camera, but I think in real life I was able to see a few light spots here and there. But either way, I was going to build it up in 3 coats anyway, just to really deepen that color, and I love how rich it is. Then we have Zen Jelly from the Good Vibrations collection, and this one is a deep taupe purple polish. So it really does blur the line between being a gray, a purple, even a bit of brown. It's a little bit of everything and definitely a nice color, but I feel like this one ended up reminding me of Bitten in the way that the color that you get on your nail is not going to be quite nearly as dark as what you see in the bottle. I feel like in the bottle this really looked like it was going to be a super dark charcoal kind of gray, which I was really looking forward to, but as you can see on the nail there definitely is more of that purple undertone, so it really is a bit warmer. But don't get me wrong, I definitely still think it's a really flattering and super unique color too. I definitely have never seen a jelly like this before, and I don't even think I have a cream like this shade. So yeah, definitely still a gorgeous color, even if it's different than what I was expecting, and formula-wise, I would say that this one is a little bit on the milky side. And last but certainly not least, we have NSFW Jelly from the Falling in Lust collection. And if it isn't obvious, this one is just a sheer black jelly. So I know a sheer black might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I feel like this is such a cool shade. With the wide brush, you get really even coverage, so it provides this really cool, smoky, kind of grungy look. It's sheer on the first coat, but still pretty pigmented, but I guess it can look like a charcoal kind of gray color just on 1 coat alone. But once you do a second, it definitely deepens up and you see more of that true black color. And it is just so cool. I especially love this one around Halloween or just in fall in general. As somebody who doesn't really wear black polish often, I just love having a squishy black. It just feels more wearable for me, and I think it's just such a cool polish when it comes to layering for nail art, especially for Halloween, because I use this to do some smoky layered spider webs, and it is just so cool. And finally, here are some collages. So this first one is the warmer half of the color wheel. So we have some berry reds and pinks, the reds going into oranges and yellows, and the chartreuse shade just because it kind of fits in here. I absolutely love all of these. It's hard to pick favorites, but some standouts are Bitten Jelly, XOXO, Fuyū, even though it's not around anymore, but Mango is also a new favorite. And then for the cooler half of the color wheel, we have the greens and blues and purples. I did my best to organize them in rainbow order, but apologies if it's not perfect. These are all 3 coats, by the way, this collage and the previous one. And there's definitely a lot of favorites on this collage too. I was also kind of surprised to see just how similar Jade and Lagoon were. Jade is just ever so slightly a bit more green and muted, so they are pretty similar, and no surprise, I can't choose favorites between those two, but other standouts for me are Verdigris and Indigo, as well as Morning Tide and Lavender Sky, those two especially. And lastly is my collage for the sheers and neutrals, and I'm going to be showing these in 1, 2, and 3 coats because I feel like the majority of these are shades that you would wear in 1 coat alone, more specifically the top 2 rows. And I know that a lot of these are kind of looking the same, where they are just giving the most subtle wash of color, but hopefully you can tell the slight differences in some of the undertones, where some are more of a cooler pink or a warmer peachy color. When it comes to just wearing these on 1 coat, I would say my favorites are Kismet and Chiffon for sure, but recent favorites are Odette and Georgette. Then here they are built up in 2 coats, and you can start to see the difference between which ones are a bit more on the milky side, like Odette or Georgette, versus which ones have a bit more visible nail line and are more sheer, like Kismet and Rosewater. So I definitely love having the options between not only the colors, but also the coverage that you're going for. But like I mentioned during all of these swatches, I feel like so many of these really can work in 1, 2, or 3 coats, depending on your preference. So here on 3 coats, I would say my favorites are Dove, Rosewater, Linen, Rose, Zen, and NSFW. I know, a lot of favorites, but I can't help it. So that wraps up my massive Cirque Jelly swatch video. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on these, if you have some of these shades already, or if there are ones that you really want to get. I pretty much am a fan of all the colors that they've put out, maybe with the exception of Olive Jelly, but I get that it has its place in the rainbow too. I really hope that you enjoyed this massive video. It's one that I've been wanting to do for months, but as you guys probably know, Cirque loves to release jellies, so when I had gotten the email for the newest collection a few months ago, I knew that I just had to wait until at least this collection came out so I can do this massive swatch video. And I'm sure they're already working on their next jellies whenever those are gonna come out. But yeah, I still really enjoyed swatching the ones that they came out with so far. I think they're just so gorgeous. Granted, a lot of the formulas might have been a little bit streaky or tricky to work with because a lot of these have the skinny brushes. I know they are kind of in the process of switching out their old skinny brushes for the new paddle brushes, as seen in the newest glaze collection that I shared yesterday. But honestly, if you are going to be picking up some of the older jelly polishes, I would recommend just getting a pack of replacement brushes, either from Cirque or from another brand, just because they really do make a world of difference when it comes to application and getting really even coverage. But yeah, I would love to know if you have tried any of these or if you're planning to. If you do love these and want to pick them up, I have my affiliate link in the description box down below. As a reminder, I am an affiliate with Cirque, so if you do want to support me directly while shopping Cirque, you can shop through my link, or you can use my one-time use code PolishedYogi10 to save 10% off your order. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed hanging out with me and swatching all of these polishes. If you did, make sure to leave this video a like, especially if you found any of the comparisons helpful, or just make sure to leave me any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!